wanted to thank you very much for having me today, and say a big thank you to the people who presented already for the very interesting inputs. And I hope that I will be able to contribute a little bit to this discussion. So without further ado, let me continue with my presentation, which I named From Anthropology of the City to an Anthropology for the City. The starting point of this presentation was the collision of my most recent empirical experiences with the increasing urbanization of various discourses and topics, which I encounter in the course of my studies. I come across that more and more notions and theoretical concepts, but also methodologies are being embedded under the umbrella of urban research or urban studies. And as I have been experiencing this shift in the position of an anthropologist in the making, I find this process to be incredibly interesting and thought-provoking. And today I'm standing in front of you as a junior researcher, probably with much less experience than most of you, practical experience for sure. And I bring nevertheless a very strong conviction that in its very core, anthropology is an applied discipline, which this understanding of mine comes from Nancy Shepherd-Hughes' seminal argument that within anthropological research, we bring in multifaceted dynamics of responsibility that are created at every step of our research. And it's a responsibility which we need to embrace and act upon. And I'm very much aware that this type of view on the subject of anthropology as an applied or engaged science is a matter of heated debates, and there is a very strong generational divide. But this is exactly also the point. I bring it in early on my talk because I look forward to receiving your feedback on that. Looking at the listed subsections proposed for the panel of this conference helped me systemically define a very particular hesitancy that I have regarding the ambiguity of studying the city as simultaneously a subject and the setting of anthropological research. Since the mid-90s, we have been successfully answering the outspoken call for action of scholars like Setelo or Jen Jacobs, who demanded the expanding of theory of the city and transforming the methodological approaches we are using. And indeed, the scholarly community carried out fascinating new approaches. So apart from this great expand into including more concepts and more methodological approaches, for me, there is a problem which I have been droning on my recent researches, that we keep on expanding the notions that are put into urban studies, but it also sort of leads us to not address actual challenges, but keep spinning in circles. To provide some context of how I came up with this question, how can we shift from anthropology of the city to anthropology for the city, namely academic research that transcends beyond its sole academic purposes. I will present you with two small projects that I carried out recently. And then I will bring to your attention the outcomes that particularly charge my viewpoint, to revisit certain theoretical concepts that we're using in a more engaged light. And as an overture, hopefully, towards your remarks and questions, I will focus specifically on the concept of the right to the city, which was already brought forward today by Professor Humphrey. And yeah, I hope that this will spark some kind of discussion. So let me start in chronological order. From March 2020 to January 21, I was part of the team of a small NGO based in Plovdiv, Bulgaria, called Association for Culture, Ethnology and Anthropology Mediator. And together we developed and carried out the project City and Markets, Opportunities for Cultural Tourism, which was funded by the National Culture Fund of Bulgaria as part of the Cultural Heritage Program. Naturally, as anthropologists, we were drawn by the social and cultural significance of the traditional markets, as well as by the sometimes overlooked role they play for the spatial development of the city. And we took heavy inspiration from Zandi and Zeivpur interpretation of traditional markets as living museums that permanently provide glimpses into the respective culture, including cultural heritage, traditional behaviors, lifestyle, and contemporary practices. Furthermore, we were interested in the argument that some of the transformation that markets undergo derive from heightened touristic interest towards them as attractions for culture enthusiasts. We merged those ideas with some already existing research by fellow Bulgarian scholars who examine traditional Bulgarian markets historically as spaces of urban genesis and contemporarily as an urban arena of development conflicts. The convergence of those ideas overlapped with the two premises we based the project on. Firstly, that traditional markets as key spaces for communication are facing many challenging transformations, which threaten their existence as spaces for social exchange and learning. And secondly, that the touristic potential of Bulgarian city markets is widely misunderstood. On the one hand, Bulgarians don't see how our mundane city or street markets may present an interest for tourists, while on the other hand, preliminary observations, we found out that many Western European tourists that come to Plovdiv expect to experience some kind of Oriental bazaar. In the context of the goal of the project was twofold: to give a new perspective on what is the continuous significance of city markets for the communities and for the neighborhoods they are part of, as well as for the city as a whole. Secondly, to confront misconceptions and misrepresentations while providing concrete examples, and we were hoped back then, incentives why nevertheless traditional markets can be attractive as alternative sites for urban tourism. Markets consisted of two parts: an ethnographic field research followed by a development of an interactive city market guide, as we had to generate data from for the creation of an accessible, entertaining and visually appealing tourist-oriented product. We have accommodated a variety of methods. After deliberate selection, we focused on 7 of Plovdiv markets, and we started with an archival research, including an overview of the print media from the 90s, which was a period of very bizarre and unexpected developments. Also in the area of trade and street trade. Markets, we conducted participatory observations, informal conversations with sellers and visitors and consumers, and more in-depth experts people organizing or managing those markets. Finally, we did visual mapping of each marketplace. Based on the outcomes of this research, we developed the urban guide, an urban guide to those markets, which can help navigate and accompany tourists and anyone who is interested in the exploration of traditional marketplaces across the city. This guide is available both in Bulgarian and English and has online and offline version. The second project is very different, so I'll make a very abrupt leap here to describe it in short, and then I will try to merge them together for a discussion. This is fundamentally different, not only because it doesn't have any applied or community beneficial aspect, but also because it's focused on the city of Vienna. And it's a small scale research which I conducted together with a couple of colleagues for a university seminar here at the University of Vienna. My colleagues and I chose to investigate who and how gets access to the renowned Viennese social housing market, Just for reference, the exemplary social housing rate, which is a legacy rooted from the Red Vienna period, nowadays, the city of Vienna owns more than 220,000 housing units. And this scope is also expanding with new housing models being built and added to the mix of opportunities for subsidized housing. Due to COVID-19 regulations, we did this research entirely online. These are some pictures of Karl Marxhof, which is the most ambitious project of coming from the Red Vienna period and still standing social housing complex. We conducted expert interviews with representatives of Wiener Wohnen, the central municipal unit responsible for social housing, but also we interviewed some representatives of the non-profit sector who specialize in providing counseling and support for people who, because of their background, usually migrant, cannot meet the eligibility criteria to apply for social housing, but are in dire need of shelter. Exactly this eligibility criteria and the process of application was of interest to us. And this is how we also connected this to the idea of Lefebvre with the right to the city. We also carried out media analysis of the main social media platforms of Wiener Wohnen, which helped us to assess how they are targeting people and what kind of narrative they present to citizens who are searching for housing opportunities and are opting for the opportunity of social housing. In a nutshell, the two projects had clearly set goals, which we managed to achieve in the course of the research and with completion of the initially outlined plan. With City and Markets, we assembled a multi-layered snapshot of Plovdiv's most visited markets in the City Market Guide, alongside the practical information such as how to reach it, what other services are around, opening hours, and etc. We included small prompts that aim to spark curiosity, to look at those places as important urban centers that preserve and uphold daily cultural practices. Similarly, with the Vienna Social Housing Project, we resolved what we framed as unclear in the beginning. We found out that not everyone who needs social housing can enter the race, and that bureaucracy of the application process is the first screening that many people cannot overcome. Notably, the people from the social housing system we talked to are already themselves very much aware of these problems and try to work on that. As anticipated, we were left with many pending questions that arose from the fieldwork for social housing, and this is not only specific for Vienna, but in general, we ask ourselves, how do we shift towards a more intersectional understanding of housing? How can the housing first principle can be more broadly recognized as a needed framework for systemic change? And how can good practices in Vienna, which are well known also across Europe, but I think as well globally, and the flaws that the Viennese system has can be studied and applied elsewhere. In the case of City and Markets, we were motivated to engage not only tourists, but also the residents of Plovdiv and to revive the public interest to the marketplaces beyond their sole provisional purpose as a place where you go to buy your vegetables and fruit. But despite our effort, we ran into very strong opinions that maybe our city will look better without some of those markets. These attitudes toward erasing some of those spaces are a result of changing consumer behaviors and the increased presence of international discount retailer chains, which make purchasing goods for everyday needs cheaper and easier. In addition, while some markets are well kept, many are left to chance and are far from providing top conditions for sellers and for customers. And it doesn't make the urban environment a more welcoming space. Yet again, our research confirmed that marketplaces, despite the transforming urban dynamics, are still important meeting points, especially the markets for fresh produce, which still provide the opportunity to buy directly from local producers. Finally, I come to the question that bothers me: what do we do with that newly generated knowledge? The answer closest to mind is to a follow-up research. But I have the feeling, and I'm pretty sure this is valid for many researchers, that we have touched upon matters that substantially impact urban development. And in this sense, we can continue accumulating research while people are struggling to find housing, because the system is unable to accommodate the demand or is unable to provide them the opportunity to apply for housing, or while local producers are being pushed outside the city when the spaces they used to occupy are no longer attractive to customers. As an alternative, I see the option in which we can act upon those indicated points of tension and try to contribute to finding some kind of sustainable solution. Otherwise, as I suggested in the beginning, the field of urban studies will keep expanding, bringing in more and more notions and methodologies, but we will also keep going around in circles. In final sort of section, I want to suggest how we can methodologically repurpose some of the key concepts through the perspective of participatory action research. And the one I'm focusing by chance is the same as Professor Humphrey brought in earlier today, and it's Lefebvre's concept of the right to the city. What I see as a potential starting point is the revision of certain theoretical concepts against the backdrop of participatory action research. PAR allows researchers and participants to co-organize, negotiate, and facilitate the research, and to cooperatively interpret and implement emerging knowledge. PAR is clearly a methodological framework for collaborative research, but it is built upon theories of symbolic interactionism and production of meanings. Hence, I propose that we can embed further theoretical concepts and use them instead of only lenses for theoretical analysis in our academic work, also as practical tools for unfolding situated knowledge, interpretations, and actions. Drawing from Lefebvre's concept of the right to the city, a notion which is central and inevitably very potent, but for me, it could be also very abstract. We can see how the idea of using such central notion as a more engaging, let's say, driver or trigger can be implemented. The right to the city encompasses the intersection of urban politics and governance, and more recent revisions of the concept also draw our attention to political participation and civic uprising. Many contemporary scholars have dealt with re-examining it so that it's more practically applicable as the lens for analysis of urban mobilization movements, such as Harvey, Marcuse, and Mayer, among others. My appeal is that we go even one step further than just using it as a lens for analyzing urban mobilization, and use it as inherently theoretical notion as a subject for participatory action research. Instead of using it as a prism for examining civic participation, urban mobilization, or the lack of it, we can revise the right to the city together with our research partners. And I think this very much follows the train of thought of thinking about intuitive districts. Such shift towards collaboratively working with theoretical concepts can elicit new interpretation. And in this particular case, those interpretations may provide new insights into what the right to the city means for interlocutors and how, in their words and from their perspective, they would act to claim it. Sure, this wouldn't be suitable for every concept or every research context, but the very acknowledgement of this approach as an acceptable research modality, in my opinion, already could bring us closer to doing anthropology for the city. In conclusion, I just want to remark that in the unstable times we live in, it's really hard to position ourselves simply as chronicles of what unfolds before our eyes. And almost 30 years ago, Nancy Shepa Hughes insisted we recognize fully our responsibility as agents in the field. For me, at this moment, this goes hand in hand with learning to recognize when and where our research comes in contact with issues that can be positively influenced by the knowledge and the understandings we gather and generate. In this train of thought, the field of urban studies seems to be a productive ground for developing a more engaged approach and outlook on research that will bridge anthropological scholarship with concrete actions leading to tangible impact, especially in the field of city making. Thank you.